My name is Brittany Brockman. I am majoring in environmental policy and analysis with a specialization in restoration. I wrote my term paper on the impact of 9/11 on the population of New York City and the state, as well as touching on immigration, emigration, the impact on the workforce, the impact on the economy, policy change, as well as the global impact that the 9/11 terrorist attack had. So I actually chose this topic because I do have a personal connection to it. My father used to work in the World Trade Center, and had he not had a headache on the morning of 9/11, he would have had meetings in the World Trade Center and would not have been able to walk away from this event. So I'm grateful that he was, but not many people were as lucky. So again, this essay focuses on the impacts as well as paying some attention to the different boroughs of New York City, as well as the New York City population and the state population, but the focus is on New York City as a whole. Before 9/11, the population of New York City was 8,008,278 people, and the population of New York State was 18,976,457 people. New York City has always been a very popular location for immigrants to come in, simply due to the promises it seems to have regarding job availability, as well as stability within those jobs and financial stability. And before 9/11, there was immigration regulation as well as visa regulation when it comes to granting them, but it was not as heavily regulated as it would become in the future following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So when 9/11 hit, it was expected to cause a drastic drop in the population of the city, as well as the number of immigrants entering the city. And that was just because it was such a large and drastic event, and people weren't exactly sure how people would react to living in a city that was just hit. So this actually was not the case, and instead the population of New York State rose from 18,976,457 people in the year 2000 to 19,157,732 people in the year 2002. So just from 2000 to 2002, a span of 2 years, the population increased by about 300,000 people entering the city. Even with the application of stricter visa regulation and stricter immigration regulation, the populations did continue to see that population rise in New York City as well as in New York State. So 9/11 did not have as hard of an impact on the population as well as the immigration as most people had predicted. Prior to 9/11, jobs in New York City were relatively easy to come by, with jobs being in constant flux, opening and closing, and positions being created constantly with the evolving industry and the need for different jobs in this city. Overall, they were relatively available prior to 9/11. About in a 3-month period following 9/11, it was estimated that 143,000 jobs were lost as a direct impact. The majority of the jobs that were lost were from the export district in the city, including industries such as transportation, management, as well as manufacturing. Now, this drastic drop in job availability did contribute to an economic recession in 2002, but it was not the only contributing factor to that recession. And recovery of these jobs was slow and steady, just with how drastically these jobs were stripped away from the market, but they weren't gone forever. So a lot of the jobs were able to be relocated to other buildings that were available, or put on a pause until the city recovered enough that these jobs could be brought back successfully, or even just replaced by more impactful and needed jobs. So with new jobs emerging, it was a turning point for people becoming more employed in the city. And while it was gradual, it did eventually pick up and occur at a normal pace again. In the years leading up to 9/11, New York City did experience a pretty large economic boom, where the employment in the private sector increased 2.6% average annual pace, which is relatively higher than it had consistently been prior to the years 1996 to 2000. the year 2001, prior to 9/11, GDP and aggregate demand were experiencing a gradual decrease in the second and third quarters. But 9/11 hit, and contrary to what most people did think was going to happen, there was a period of growth experienced in the fourth quarter. So the state, national, and local economies were not the only ones hit by 9/11. The global economy also was impacted, where the GDP and the aggregate demand of the global economy as well did suffer a small decrease, though it was short-lived. So while 9/11 was a contributing factor to this economic recession that the United States and the global economy were facing, it was not the only contributing factor. So while the global economy was predicted to suffer a sharp decline due to 9/11, it actually did experience that period of growth in the fourth quarter alongside the United States economy. So again, while the effects of 9/11 were drastic and impactful, they were not the only factors that contributed to the economic recession that the nation as well as the globe entered into following 9/11 and entering into 2002. So similarly to the effects of 9/11 on immigration, emigration was actually predicted to have a sharp increase in the amount of people leaving the city. Prior to the attacks, there was a constant flow of people in and out of the city, but there was not one drastic event that would commonly cause people to leave the city. Following 9/11, just due to the drastic measures and severity of the attacks, a lot of people were predicted to leave the city, so a large percentage of the population would have been lost simply as a result of 9/11 and the fear that was induced because of these attacks. However, that was actually not the case either. An increase in emigration can be seen in boroughs of the city such as Queens, which faced an increase in the population from the year 2000 to 2001, but following 9/11 actually faced a decrease in the population from 2001 to 2002, just from these attacks. But the same cannot be said for boroughs such as New York, as well as the Bronx, where these two actually experienced an increase in population and immigration following 9/11. So the population of New York State did increase from the years 2000 to 2002, just reinforcing the fact that while horrible events and drastic events do occur, there is still a constant flow of people in and out of the city. So 9/11 did not have the effect that many people thought that it would have on emigration, but it did have certain effects that certain boroughs felt more heavily than others in New York City. But the state did not suffer as drastically as previously predicted. So prior to 9/11, there were rules revolving around immigration and visas to gain access into the United States, but 9/11 did mark a turning point where there was heightened security as well as increased measures to look into people's backgrounds who wish to enter the country. So increased security at points of entry to the United States as well as at airports where people were flying into the United States were heightened, as well as border patrol and different security measures at airports such as taking shoes off before entering planes were enforced just to ensure extra measures of safety. Also following 9/11, there were stricter requirements to be granted a visa to come into the country, and the process became more difficult for immigrants. The new process to maintain a visa or obtain a visa kind of made the old process look very brief in comparison. Now there were heightened background checks and family background checks and peer reviews to be approved for visas. So a large takeaway from the impact on policy was the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, which was made up of about 20 different federal agencies that was recognized or were recognized under this kind of umbrella term of the Department of Homeland Security. So the department does work to keep border interactions safe, documented, and secure for people that are already in the United States, people that are coming into the United States, as well as people working to regulate that process. So policy in the United States as well as our policy on immigration, did have some pretty drastic upheaval and alteration following 9/11. So while 9/11 was an isolated attack in the United States, the result of the repercussions were felt on a more global scale. They were not strictly exclusive to the United States. So multiple nations were impacted by this event, and the measures and actions taken by the United States following this event as a direct result of 9/11 also had effects on other nations. So the 9/11 terrorist attacks were an eye-opener for other nations who otherwise viewed their borders or their securities as impenetrable. So much like the United States did, they were feeling vulnerable and focusing on how they could just better protect their citizens as well as improve security within their own nations. And this was not only to protect the integrity and security of their nations, but the safety and security and integrity of their citizens as well as immigrants entering their countries. So with an increase in immigration policy as well as an increase in immigration refusals and visa denials, discrimination did find its way to the forefront following 9/11, with different people being discriminated against based on their race, their skin tone, their dress, their appearance. So people were declined visas based on the assumption of terrorist activity, which in and of itself contributes directly to racial profiling. And the number of visas issued to Muslim and Arabic people, as well as people from other Middle Eastern region, did experience a drastic decrease because of this discrimination. And the occurrence of hate crimes towards different groups of people did increase as a direct result of 9/11 in the United States and globally. But the United States Department of Homeland Security does have a global impact with the effect that it has on immigration into the United States for people seeking refuge or safety from their own home nations. So 9/11 did have a relatively drastic global impact, and it was not limited to just the United States. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 did alter many aspects of life, including jobs, workforce, immigration, emigration, different policies that would affect different people, and there was just an overall heavy presence following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So jobs were created, including different jobs to help ensure safety, as well as different jobs to find people or clean up after the attacks. Immigration and emigration were not as drastically impacted as previously thought, and while they did face differences in numbers than previous years, overall, immigration did face a consistent increase and emigration did not. Certain boroughs did face those drops in numbers and effects more heavily, but overall, immigration and emigration were relatively consistent with previous years. The economy did feel immediate kind of pressure as a result of 9/11, but those results were not long-term. So 9/11 was a contributing factor in the economic recession for the nation as well as globally. But these events for 9/11 were not as impactful, again, as previously thought. Foreign policy in the United States has been drastically changed and rewritten and altered to accommodate for the potential of another attack. Increased security measures at airports as well as ports of entry into the country were heavily increased, but even security in daily life was increased, and it did face pretty dramatic change. Immigration and immigration policy into the United States affects people globally, where people seeking refuge from their home nation can no longer come into this country based on discrimination due to race. Life as an immigrant is not the only aspect that was heavily affected by these attacks. The citizens of the United States did also feel drastic and constant effects of these attacks. And while the physical fires as well as material residue may have been cleaned up, the nation still feels residual effects from the attacks. These effects can be seen in day-to-day activities and daily life all over the nation. So here are my references. I just wanted to thank you for such an educational and insightful class. I do genuinely feel like I learned and retained a lot more information than I have in other classes. So I just want to thank you for that and wish you good luck in the future, and thank you for an awesome semester. And that's all. Thank you.